What is the number one thing that Stormlight Archive, The Name of the Wind, Game of Thrones have in common? That they are not yet concluded. And yes, I love them, but I also want some stories that are already finished and that can give me that fulfillment side. And that is important. And in here, I have a handful of great fantasy books that will give you just that. Starting with The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I know this is all over BookTube right now, and I am converted to this trend as well. I've read book 1 and 2. I am loving each book more than the last. It is at its core a war story, how the empire is created and broken and created again, and there are lots of different characters, different sides in this war, and you will get to see their stories and how they maneuver, how they create these amazing strategies, and how at its core we have characters that are very nuanced, that are unforgettable. The first book reads very much as a historical fantasy, almost, in a way in which you really know what is happening, because each chapter, which are really short, tells you an event in this almost war that it's happening, but not really getting to know the deep thoughts of these characters. Book 2, and I've heard that book 3 and 4 as well, are evolving into a way more classical narration style where we get a quicker pace and also a little bit more of connection. But even without that, in the first book, it's still a very solid installment that I just cannot recommend enough. And we continue with the trilogy, one of my favorites, Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. A perfect blend between magic, politics, religion, rebellion, romance, misfits, incredible action scenes. It is a story about a heist that it will evolve into almost a rebellion. The premise, it's very fascinating because we will be following this society where the bad one has been ruling for hundreds of years. In the society, it's super oppressed. They want things to change. There's this ash that it's falling and everyone is very unhappy. Their story at its core will follow very charismatic characters, and there's especially one that will break your heart. The action scenes as well are fantastic because the magic system, it's based on allomancy, which consists on people being able to ingest metal and these metals giving them special powers. And there are a lot of different things you can do with these powers. You can stop time, you can make it go faster, you can fly, persuade people. So you can imagine how people with these different powers fighting just create a very unique visual setting that it's very, very, very appealing. There's also these misfits that are getting together, also a lot of family fun vibes, and I found myself completely addicted to this story. It has really something fantastic if you're not used to read fantasy, because it creates a world building that it's rich, but that it's really easy to access because it is the prose, it's very simple in a way, and it has the perfect blend of action, a pace that moves fast, but at the same time characters that are profound, that allow you to reflect, that just make you feel very intense emotions, and it's a joy to read. Then we continue with a quartet that it has taken me lots of years to read, and that is The Faithful and the Fallen. I've just read the first one, Malice, and I got this book recommended time and time and time again, and I was like, maybe not for me, maybe not the moment, and now I'm really not understanding why I never picked it up before. It is truly a joy to read. It deserves all the hype and all the fans that has gathered. The premise is this great forces of greatness and evil that are fighting. So in a way, it feels to me that there are tropes that are very core to what we understand in fantasy. There's also this master figure, these forces that are aligning, that are evolving, not really knowing who is good, who is bad, but at the same time there are mages, there are ogres. Took me a little bit to get into it because it starts really jumping to lots of different perspectives, and it took me a little bit to connect the dots. I'm somewhat used to read different perspectives that start in very different places in this land and then eventually they combine, and in this story I felt these different perspectives knew one another. It was a little bit more complex to me then to see who was who, because in a scene in the same kind of setting I was repeating characters, but the ones that I got them, I fell in love with all of them. There was no scene or chapter that got me bored. The perfect combination to just read something very addictive. In terms of pacing, it starts fairly slow, but it picks up towards the end. And moving from longer series to somewhat shorter, we have Vicious by B. Schwab. It's such a weird blend of horror and fantasy. There's something about B. Schwab that always really fascinates me, because she's able to write characters that are always bad and magic that it's always fairly dark, but in a way that really, it's creepy, it's broken, but it is really unavoidable. The idea is that if you have a near-death experience, then you can access some powers, and we will be following these two characters that are best friends from university, but then time has passed and they are enemies, and you don't really know what has happened, and the book will just give you that journey. You will see how there's an event that it's happening. So in terms of pacing, really fast. You will get to see flashbacks to what happened, plus the plotting on how to defeat the other in the future. There are also other characters and other powers, and how those powers are used, I felt were really unique. There's also a pretty good reflection of how good or bad it is to have these powers, if we should have them or not, and I found it being really interesting. In the complete opposite spectrum, but keeping the duologies, we have The Elements of Credence by Rebecca Ross, and I say this is the opposite because this is not dark, it feels beautiful. If you've read The Song of Achilles or Circe and you're seeking something that reads similarly, then this is definitely for you. It's mesmerizing, it had elements that were really beautiful, different perspectives, all of them are adult characters, they feel mature, there's a tiny little bit of romance every now and then, but it's not making the romance the core of the story. It's more about the magic, it's more about the relationships in itself, and how knowing oneself it's key, because in here, this isle, it's been divided in two, and there are these two different villages in this Isle of Scotland, and in one side of it, the girls have been kidnapped and we don't know what is happening, and one of the characters will need to come back, and he will need to use again his magic, which he does around music, in order to understand, to persuade the spirits and to learn what is happening. It's a story that reads beautifully if there is this gloomy day, but it's also beautiful in any moment, and I guess if you want to romanticize your life, this is kind of like the story for you to do so. And then we move to The Daughter of the Moon Goddess. I've just read the first one in the duology, but I've heard that the second one is also pretty strong, and I have it here. I will read it this summer. We will be following a story that spans throughout lots of time, because we will be following these characters that are almost immortals, and there's also a little bit of a chosen one that needs to advance. There's an impossible task, there's a training session, there's a mission, and it's again a beautiful story that has great visuals. And with that I mean that the imagery that we have, that it's described, it's very beautiful. We will have dragons of different colors, there's also this celestial court, there are different caves. The pacing, it's really fast, so that also helped me to just start this story, and I wasn't able to put it down. It follows the story of our girl who is not supposed to do magic. She lives in the moon with her mom, and she is a secret. And one day she does a little bit of magic, and because of that she needs to flee, and she kind of like becomes obsessed with the idea of saving her mom and freeing her from the moon. And in order to do so, she will embark herself on this mission of infiltrating the celestial court and trying to gain a boon from the Empress. Fair warning though, it has a little bit of romance, not in a sense in which it's spicy, but in a way in which the romance has a point in this story. With way less romance, but way more races and intrigue, we have the Winnowing Flame Trilogy by Jen Williams. It's so unique. It blends sci-fi and horror and fantasy. We'll be following different perspectives of different races throughout this land, and the great thing about this is that there's this huge mystery that we will need to unravel, which is a war is about to happen and we don't know who are the enemies or how to defeat them. And our characters are completely lost because the only creatures that were able to fight them are almost all dead. There's therefore this very unique situation in which you will need to discover piece by piece what are the remnants of these wars that has happened in the past in order to figure what's happening. There are also visions happening. Such a good read. There are animal creatures in this story, and I felt myself really attached to some of these characters. There's especially one character that will have this arc that it's essentially not a good one, and I was completely fascinated by the path that this character had and how this character faced that, and I was so mad, so obsessed, and at the same time it was done in a way that felt so good, so very well fleshed out. However, if you want to know which characters I would die for, then you need to read the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. This is concluded, it's a trilogy, and it is a masterpiece. It also leans more character driven, but the magic and the politics and the strategy and the family drama, everything, it's so intense that you will just drink these words. It is not something that happens really fast, although the pacing I felt was very well done, but it's so easy to get obsessed with this story. There's a fight for the control of the jade in this land called Kakon, and there are two main bands that are fighting for it, and each band is structured in a way in which they have three different characters in power, and we will be following especially one of these bands and how the siblings in this band relate, how they work, and how they are. Is just so fascinating. The jade, yes, gives people special powers so they can become almost superhumans. Not everyone can wield this jade, but there's not as much power in this story to the jade and how that is magical, but there's way more political. Another duology that it's brilliant and that made me fell in love with reading, it's Strange the Dreamer. Yes, it leans a little bit more younger, but there are themes that are really not that young and that are pretty dark. So if you usually enjoy adult fantasy but you want to try something that reads a little bit more younger and whimsical, give this one a try because it really pays off. The magic, it's soft, but it is a very unique. Also, we will have this land called the City of Weep, which is a city that was forgotten because something with the magic with the city has happened that has made everyone forget the name and its people, but also because we will follow different characters that are misfits. There's a lot of family found vibe. It's true that leans a little bit more towards the purple prose, not yet, but it is a little bit descriptive. Overall, the story is really good. How are we doing? Are we doing all right? Let me know down below if you're still here, and I really appreciate if you are. Let's continue with The Bone Shard Daughter, which is the first book in the Drowning Empire, which is also a concluded trilogy. Blends masterfully sci-fi and horror and fantasy. There's a hard magic system that I am completely obsessed with, which consists on very special people being able to inscribe bones and then putting these bones on different creatures and being able to command these creatures. The twist here is that these bones belong to people and they are giving kind of like the soul, the energy to these creatures, and at some point these bones will run dry and they will kill people, and people, it's about to rebel, but a terrible evil, it's about to emerge, and we will follow different characters that will be thrown in this very chaotic world where in one hand the Isles are drowning, and another, the daughter of the emperor has forgotten everything and she does not really know how to do this magic anymore, and if she does not know that, her father will not give her the empire. It's also very political, and we will have great animal companions as well, which is always a plus for me. This is one of my favorite series of all time. It's really underrated and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, okay, fine. Let's have a little bit of rubbing off here with the Life Ship trilogy. I've just read the first one, Sheep of Magic, but this was so good. Up till this point, I was a little bit of a hater of Hob. I did not find myself really loving her previous stories I've tried before. In this story, yes, the pacing is slow, but the plot moves, and oh boy, The characters are amazing. I hate and love all of them. There's something that you discover while you read, which is that this author is a genius. She's able to craft and to describe people in a way that really scared me, because it really felt as real people. In essence, follows the premise of these sheeps that can quicken, and that means that if 3 generations of a family die in that ship, then eventually this ship can almost become alive, are sentient, and they can help them navigate. They can go to very dangerous places where only these quickened ships can go. But of course, things won't go as expected. I want to continue because I am obsessed with this story, but at the same time, I don't want to continue because I am not sure how these characters will fare, and I am scared about that. And if you want to know other very addictive 5-star reads, I will leave you here a video with a handful of those fantasy books in case you want to check it out.